What does it take to rise to the top of New York's criminal underworld? Power, fear, and ruthless ambition. These 5 men weren't mere criminals. They ruled the streets, leaving a trail of chaos behind them. Their names carried weight, and their actions left scars that still mark the city. From brutal heists to unrelenting violence, these figures shaped the world of crime. Today we'll count down the top 5 most dangerous gang members in New York's history and reveal the untold truths behind their reigns of terror. Get ready for a look into a world where survival means staying ahead of the law and each other. New York City, a place where dreams are made, but equally where nightmares are born. A city of towering ambitions, constant hustle, and behind every corner, power struggles that define the course of history. Here, survival isn't just about making it, it's about dominating or being crushed under the weight of a relentless world. The streets, where millions of lives intersect daily, are not just pathways. They are battlefields, a place where the toughest rise to the top and the weak are swallowed whole. For decades, the streets of New York have been shaped by organized crime and gang violence, creating an environment in which the most ruthless individuals ascend to positions of power. The city's towering skyline tells a story of financial triumph, but beneath it, in the shadows of its alleys and corners, lies a darker, more brutal narrative, a narrative of crime, corruption, and chaos. These were not just the dark sides of a bustling metropolis, they were the very forces that shaped its identity, influencing the lives of its residents in ways unimaginable. New York's complex socioeconomic reality has long been a battleground, where inequality, lack of opportunity, and systemic challenges affected the lives of many. In this city, where dreams often collide with harsh realities, a small group of individuals rose from the shadows, driven by circumstances that pushed them toward a dangerous path. In neighborhoods where the struggle for survival was real, these figures found ways to exploit the system, building criminal empires that would come to define their legacies. The harsh conditions of the city's streets created a space where power could be seized, and these men weren't fighting to survive, they were fighting to take control. They didn't just live in the city, they remade it. From the dense, unforgiving streets of Brooklyn to the towering buildings of Manhattan, their influence spread. These figures didn't simply take control, they dictated the lives of those within their reach. Money, power, and fear became their tools, and their names became tied to the kind of dominance that forced even the most seasoned criminals to step aside. But perhaps what makes their reigns so significant is the fact that their stories didn't end with just violence. These men were often strategic masterminds, playing chess while everyone else played checkers. They manipulated those around them, knowing when to strike and when to pull back, knowing how to use their allies and destroy their enemies. With every action, they didn't just shape the streets. They reshaped the entire culture of organized crime in the city, setting the stage for the next generation of criminal masterminds to follow in their footsteps. These weren't just gangsters, they were icons. Their influence reached far beyond the criminal underworld. They bled into every part of the city, touching the lives of ordinary citizens, law enforcement, and even the political establishment. What made them so dangerous wasn't just their ruthlessness, it was their ability to manipulate, their ability to stay one step ahead, their ability to make the city bow to their will. They were feared not just because of what they could do, but because of what they had already done. Now, as we dig deeper into the dark legacies these men left behind, we uncover a history of crime, power, and manipulation that still resonates today. These are the stories of the men who redefined what it meant to rule New York. So let's meet them, these 5 men who terrorized the streets, manipulated the system, and left an indelible mark on the city they once controlled. Their stories are filled with unimaginable brutality, but they also tell of a time when fear was the ultimate currency. And now their stories will unfold, piece by piece, as we explore the dark legacies they left behind. As number 5, we have Kelvin Klein Bacote. Kelvin Bacote, born in 1966, grew up in Brooklyn, New York, with his parents and siblings. From an early age, the streets of Brooklyn would shape his future, leading him into the heart of the city's underground drug trade. In the mid-1980s, Bacote entered the crack cocaine market, where his calculated approach and sharp mind quickly elevated him to a position of power. By organizing a vast network of distributors, he became a central figure in the East Coast drug scene, earning the moniker Calvin Klein, a name that carried weight not only in Brooklyn but across the entire eastern seaboard. Bacote's rise to prominence wasn't without conflict. In 1988, he was charged with second-degree murder and multiple counts of possessing deadly weapons. His time in court was marked by tension, but in 1989 he was acquitted of all charges. However, his legal troubles were far from over. Shortly after the acquittal, Bacote found himself once again facing serious charges, this time alongside Sean Carter, who would later be known as Jay-Z, in a case involving attempted murder and assault. The two were on the brink of long prison sentences, facing up to 40 years. In a calculated move, Bacote took full responsibility for the crimes, sparing his associate Carter from the charges, and allowing him to continue his path toward fame. In the wake of these legal battles, Bacote was determined to leave a lasting mark beyond the streets. He sought to finance a record label for up-and-coming artists, including Jay-Z, Jazzo, and Biz Markie. Unfortunately, Bacote's plans were cut short as he unknowingly became the target of a federal investigation that led to his conviction. In 1990, Bacote was sentenced to 25 years for his criminal activities. However, after years of legal maneuvering, his earlier convictions were overturned, and the 25-year sentence was reduced to 15 years. Bacote served 13 years behind bars, during which his influence in the streets and his ties to artists in the rap industry only grew stronger. Upon his release in 2004, Bacote was determined to make a new path for himself. His reputation in the streets may have been infamous, but the world of music saw him as an asset. He was asked to manage the international sensation Akon, and together they built the Convict music label, propelling Akon to multi-platinum success. Bacote's involvement in the music industry became a symbol of his ability to evolve from a feared figure to a mentor and guide for young artists. His past, acknowledged by musicians like Jay-Z, Akon, and French Montana, remains a part of his story, but it's also clear that Bacote has carved out a second chapter as a respected figure in the business world. But Bacote's transformation didn't stop here. The next figure we'll explore took the crime scene in New York to even greater extremes. And number 4, we have Kelvin Martin's. Kelvin Martin's story begins in the heart of the Bronx, where he was born and raised. Growing up in one of New York's most notorious neighborhoods, his childhood was shaped by hardship, and it didn't take long before he became familiar with the harsh realities of street life. His nickname, 50 Cent, wasn't just a moniker, but a symbol of the life he was determined to lead. The name came from a street hustler he admired, and soon it was one everyone in the Bronx knew. But it wasn't long before Kelvin transitioned from petty thefts to a much more dangerous world. As his reputation grew, so did the stakes. From street robberies to high-risk heists, Martin had a knack for pulling off dangerous jobs. He knew how to make a quick escape and keep his operation low profile, earning him the respect of both his peers and those who feared him. Yet, it wasn't just about the money, it was about power. And Martin was obsessed with gaining it. Kelvin's rise through the criminal world wasn't without bloodshed. With his eyes set on drug dealers and rival gang members, he didn't hesitate to use violence when necessary. Martin wasn't content with simply taking money. He wanted to make a statement. He became notorious for his ruthless efficiency, targeting anyone who posed a threat to his rise. Whether it was rival drug dealers or anyone who owed him money, no one was safe from his methods. Fear became his weapon, and the streets responded in kind, with whispers of his brutal tactics spreading like wildfire. But despite the terror he instilled, Kelvin earned a level of grudging respect. The streets acknowledged his cunning and ferocity, even if they feared him. In a world where violence was often a means to an end, Martin's willingness to go further than most made him a figure of awe and fear. However, as with many who rise quickly, his time in the streets was limited. Kelvin Martin's reign ended in 1987 when he was shot and killed at just 23 years old. His death marked the end of a brutal chapter in New York's underworld, but his legacy didn't die with him. Despite his short life, Martin's impact on the culture surrounding the streets lasted far longer. His story was immortalized in various forms of media, most notably in the rise of rapper 50 Cent, who adopted the name and used it to build a career in music and entertainment. Kelvin Martin's brief but bloody reign may have ended, but the echoes of his legacy are still felt today. As one of the most feared figures in New York's violent past, his name became synonymous with danger and respect. But his life also serves as a cautionary tale. In the criminal world, glory is often fleeting. Kelvin Martin's reign was brief but bloody. Our next figure not only terrorized the streets, but left a mark on pop culture forever. And number 3, we have Walter Johnson. Walter Johnson, widely known as King Tut, emerged as one of Brooklyn's most notorious figures during the turbulent 1990s. Born and raised in an environment where survival often meant taking risks, Johnson quickly established a reputation that set him apart. He wasn't merely a criminal, he was a force that commanded attention, respect, and fear. By his early 20s, Johnson had carved out a name for himself as a ruthless enforcer and skilled robber, willing to use extreme measures to get what he wanted. As his notoriety grew, so did the stories surrounding him. His name became synonymous with violent heists and unrelenting aggression, leaving a trail of terrified victims in his wake. It wasn't long before whispers began circulating about his alleged connection to the infamous 1994 shooting of Tupac Shakur. While never proven, the rumors only solidified his image as a dangerous and unpredictable presence in the streets. Johnson's reign came to a crashing halt when law enforcement closed in. After a string of violent robberies, he was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 5 life terms. For most, this would be the end of the story, a life confined to the walls of a prison. But for Walter Johnson, it was the beginning of something unexpected. Behind bars, Johnson underwent a transformation that surprised even those who knew him best. He became a leader, not of crime, but of change. He initiated programs aimed at steering young men away from the path he once walked. He earned recognition from prison officials for his efforts, becoming a voice of reason in a place where hope was often scarce. In recent years, Johnson was granted an early release, a decision that stirred both controversy and curiosity. Since his return to Brooklyn, he has dedicated himself to mentoring at-risk youth, using his past as a powerful example of what not to become. His words resonate because they are rooted in experience. His regrets and lessons are now tools he uses to guide others. But Walter King Tut Johnson's story doesn't end with redemption. It remains a complicated tale of a man who once ruled through fear, now trying to lead through wisdom. Still, his legacy is a reminder of a darker time, a period when violence was currency and respect came at the highest price. King Tut may have found redemption. At number 2, we have Jimmy Henchman Rosemond's. Jimmy Henchman Rosemond's journey began in the streets of Brooklyn, where he was born and raised in a neighborhood shaped by hardship. Like so many young men around him, he was drawn into the drug trade at an early age, seeing it as the only way to escape the crushing weight of poverty. His sharp mind and relentless ambition set him apart, and it wasn't long before he climbed the ranks of the criminal underworld. But Jimmy Rosemond wasn't content with just being another player in the game. He wanted power, control, and influence, and he was willing to take risks to achieve it. As he gained prominence, Rosemond began to straddle 2 worlds, the streets and the emerging hip-hop industry. He positioned himself as a music manager, working with some of the biggest names in the business. On the surface, he appeared to be a legitimate businessman, but beneath the facade was a calculated and dangerous figure who used his connections to expand his empire. By the mid-1990s, Jimmy Rosemond was a name that commanded both respect and fear. His control over a sprawling cocaine operation brought him immense wealth, but it also brought trouble. To protect his empire, Rosemond relied on violence and intimidation, allegedly orchestrating acts that left his rivals reeling. Among the most infamous was his alleged role in the 1994 attack on Tupac Shakur, an incident that remains a topic of fierce debate and speculation to this day. As his empire grew, so did the pressure from law enforcement. Rosemond's cocaine operation was generating millions of dollars, but the weight of his criminal activities was catching up with him, building a case that would ultimately expose the full extent of his operations. In 2011, Rosemond was arrested, bringing an end to his reign. The charges against him included drug trafficking and orchestrating murder-for-hire schemes. The trial revealed the depths of his ruthlessness, painting a picture of a man who would stop at nothing to maintain his position at the top. Convicted and sentenced to life in prison, Jimmy Rosemond's story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how ambition, when paired with violence and greed, can lead to devastating consequences. Jimmy Henchman was ruthless, but our number one gangster was a true force of destruction. And number one, we have Howard Pappy Mason's. Howard Pappy Mason's life began in South Jamaica, Queens, a neighborhood that, like many others in the 1970s and 1980s, was defined by economic hardship, limited opportunities, and the daily grind of survival. For many young men growing up in this environment, the line between right and wrong blurred under the weight of desperation. Mason, however, did not simply step across that line. He obliterated it, choosing to carve out a path that would leave an indelible mark on New York's history. By his teenage years, Mason was already entrenched in a world of crime. He quickly gained a reputation as someone who not only demanded respect, but enforced it with cold efficiency. His rise through the ranks of the criminal underworld was swift, aided by his fearlessness and willingness to wield violence as a tool of control. It wasn't long before he caught the attention of one of the most powerful drug lords of the era, Lorenzo "Fat Cat" Nichols. Their partnership was a formidable one. Nichols, a mastermind in the crack cocaine trade, relied on Mason to ensure that his operations ran smoothly and without interruption. In this role, Mason became the enforcer of the empire. He was not just a soldier in Nichols' organization, he was its iron fist, eliminating threats and maintaining order through a mixture of intimidation and unrelenting aggression. Mason's infamy grew alongside the crack epidemic that gripped New York City. This was a time when entire neighborhoods were being hollowed out by addiction, and the streets became battlegrounds for control over the lucrative drug trade. Mason thrived in this chaos, showing an uncanny ability to command loyalty while instilling fear. His name carried weight not just within his own circle, but among rival crews and even the police. Yet, for all his power, it was one decision, a single chilling order, that solidified Mason's place in the annals of New York's darkest chapters. In February 1988, Mason orchestrated the assassination of Officer Edward Byrne. Byrne, a young and inexperienced officer, had been assigned to guard a witness in a drug case. For Mason, this was an opportunity to send a clear and devastating message. Law enforcement was not untouchable, and anyone who interfered with his operations would pay the ultimate price. The murder was carried out with brutal precision. Byrne, sitting in his patrol car, was ambushed and executed in a hail of gunfire. The act was as calculated as it was brazen, shocking the city to its core. Byrne's death was not merely the loss of a young officer. It was a statement that no one, not even those sworn to protect the public, was safe from the violence engulfing the streets. The response to Byrne's assassination was immediate and unrelenting. Public outrage reached a fever pitch, with citizens and officials alike demanding action. The killing became a rallying cry for law enforcement, spurring an unprecedented crackdown on organized crime. Task forces were formed, resources were poured into investigations, and the pressure on figures like Mason and Nichols intensified. Mason's arrest and subsequent conviction marked the end of his reign, but not the end of his story. Sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Mason now spends his days behind bars, cut off from the empire he once ruled. Yet, his legacy endures, not as a tale of triumph, but as a stark reminder of the human cost of unchecked power and violence. For many, Mason remains a symbol of an era when fear gripped communities, and lives were lost to both addiction and the violence that surrounded the drug trade. His actions did more than claim lives. They forced a city to confront its own vulnerabilities and demand change. Howard Pappy Mason's actions forever changed New York, leaving a legacy of fear that still echoes today, in the memories of those who lived through his reign and in the lessons learned from a time of unprecedented turmoil. As we draw to a close, let us take a moment to reflect on the individuals we've explored in this journey through New York City's most chaotic years. Each name on this list represents a chapter of chaos, an era defined by fear, and lives forever altered by the actions of these 5 men, from the raw brutality of Walter King Tut Johnson to the calculated maneuvering of Jimmy Henchman Rosemond, and from the commanding presence of Kelvin Klein, Bacote to the unchecked ruthlessness of Howard Pappy Mason. These figures didn't just participate in the city's underworld, they shaped it, leaving their fingerprints on some of the darkest events in its history. Together, they painted a grim portrait of power wielded without mercy, ambition pursued without restraint, and dominance achieved at unimaginable costs. Each of their stories offers a glimpse into a time when New York stood on the brink, grappling with forces that threatened to consume it. Their legacies may be etched in violence, but their impact serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of order and the resilience of those who fight to preserve it. But now the question turns to you. Out of these 5 figures, who do you think holds the title of the most dangerous? Is it the sheer terror of Mason's calculated acts, or perhaps the wide-reaching influence of Rosemond's empire? Could it be Bacote's iron grip over the streets, or Johnson's infamy that extended far beyond his crimes? Or maybe you believe there's someone missing from this list, an overlooked figure whose shadow loomed just as large over the city. We want to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments below and join the conversation. Let's dive into this debate together and uncover even more insights about the people and events that shaped history's underworld. And this is just the beginning. New York's story is only one chapter in a much larger book of criminal empires, untold tragedies, and moments of astonishing resilience. Stay tuned for more gripping tales that will pull back the curtain on the hidden worlds that operate just beneath the surface of society. There are more stories waiting to be told. Stories of ambition, betrayal, redemption, and consequences that ripple through time. Don't miss what's coming next. This has been a journey into the shadows, but the light of truth always finds its way through. Until next time, stay safe and keep questioning the stories that history leaves behind.